Hello everyone, welcome back. Let's look into the most asked Angular interview questions in this video. Okay, so to start with, the first question is what is Angular? Okay, Angular is a front-end framework and it follows single page application model. And every time when the user navigate from one page to another page, it will get the new component and display on the single page itself. And Angular was developed by Google. It was Angular version 2 started in 2015, and the latest version of Angular is 17, which was released in November 2023. What is two-way data binding? So Angular became famous because of the two-way data binding. So without reloading the page, the view will be automatically in sync with the model. That means if there is any change to the model object, it will automatically update the view, which is HTML, without even reloading the page. So for this, Angular uses directives internally, and it will have a watcher on each and every field, and watcher will trigger when there is an update to the field in the HTML as well as in the TypeScript. And as soon as the watcher triggers, it will update the value both vice versa from HTML to TypeScript and TypeScript to HTML. What is dependency injection in Angular? So dependency injection is a design pattern which will make sure that all the dependencies are properly injected and available to a component before it is rendering onto the web browser. So in Angular, to accomplish this dependency injection, we have to inject a service or directive. In Angular, we have to inject the dependencies in the constructor of a component so that it will be available for the component while rendering. For example, a service can be injected into the constructor of the component, or you can, if you want to use the routing module, so we can inject the router module into the constructor. If you want to use the element reference, even we can inject the element reference into the constructor of a component. What is a component? So a component is a building block of Angular application. So one component or multiple components working together and rendered onto the web browser will create an Angular application. So these components can have a relation like parent to child or child to parent. So the components can have the relationships like parent to child and child to parent. At the same time, even it is allowed to have independent components where there is no relation between them, and components can share the data between parent to child using @input, and to send the data from child to parent we use @output with the event emitter, and emit method is going to emit the value to the parent, and to get hold of the message or data from the child we have to have a handler in the parent. So to get for a parent component to get hold of the child component data or methods, we can use @viewChild, and viewChild will get hold of the child component as well as its parameters as well as its methods, so that parent will get hold of that and can be accessed in the parent component. The fourth one is service. A service can be injected into any component, and it can be used to share the data between any component. Even if there is a relationship or without relationship, it can still share the data. So the lifecycle methods of a component. So every component follows a lifecycle in Angular while rendering onto the web browser. So a constructor is the first one. It's a lifecycle hook, and this is the first and most important lifecycle hook. And a component can be the constructor is called when the component is created. Okay, as soon as the component is created, that's when constructor is called to create the component. The second one is ng on changes. This ng on changes triggers when there is a field value that is updated on the Angular component, and it will have a current value and the previous value, and one more parameter called whether this is the first change or not. It's a boolean value. If it is a first change, it will have a true. If it is not a first change, it will have a false. So these are the three parameters, and ng on changes will get an input parameter as a simple changes object, and it will have all the changes that are related to the component when it triggers ng on changes. The next one is ng on init. ng on init is called after the constructor. So if you want to make an API call or pass some data to the component HTML to display, we have to keep that logic in the ng on init instead of constructor, because if you keep any logic in the constructor, by the time we call the constructor, component is not even created. It will be called while creating a component. So any data that you want to display on the page, that should go to ng on init instead of constructor. The next one is ng do check. It is almost same as ng on changes, and if you are using ng on changes, you cannot use ng do check in the same component, so vice versa. The next one is ng on destroy. This particular lifecycle hook is called when the component is destroyed from the DOM. Some more lifecycle methods that are ng after content init, and ng after content checked, ng after view init, ng after view checked. Angular offers lifecycle hooks that provide the visibility into these key life movements and the ability to act when they occur. So these are applied at the child level of the component. How do you route in Angular? So there are two different ways to route from one page to another page in Angular. First one is using the router link. So the router link can be used within the HTML file itself, and it will take the two different parameters. First parameter is the path, and the second parameter is going to be the parameter properties that we want to pass to the next page. And the second way is from the TypeScript file. To use this, we need to first inject the router module, Angular router module, into the constructor of the component, and using that router module we can call navigate URL or navigate methods, and we can pass the URL as well as the parameters that you want to pass to the next page. Along with this, in the app routing.ts file, we should have an entry with the path. So it should have a colon and the ID or the field names and the component name, so that it will route to that specific component. How do you make API call in Angular? So to make the API call, we must import the HTTP client module in the app module.ts file, and we must inject the HTTP client module in the service from where we are making the API call. So HTTP is the module that is used in Angular to make the REST API calls or service calls. What is pipe in Angular? A pipe is Angular feature which will perform some sort of logic on the view for some of the components. For suppose there are different type of existing pipes from the framework itself, and we can even create our own pipe in Angular using ng generate pipe schematic, and the pipe is going to transform the content on the UI, and existing pipes are uppercase or date formats. These are the existing pipes Angular offering, and at the same time we can also create our own custom pipes and use it. What is a directive? So a directive is one of the most important Angular feature. It is providing additional logic, and it is providing additional capability for the HTML components to perform some additional features while rendering onto the UI. So the directive can be applied at three different levels. One is attribute level, which is like a span tag or any HTML attribute. And the second one is at the component level, at the rate directive can be applied to the directly to the component. And the third one is we can apply this directive at the portion of the page as well, when we with the use of ng for loop or ng if conditions. Types of forms in Angular. So there are two types of forms in Angular. First one is template based form. Second one is reactive form or dynamic form. So to use the template based form, the HTML form content will be in the form content will be in HTML, and it is useful only when if the form is small and the use case is smaller use case. You can use the template based form just for login or register type of scenarios, but when it comes to the large complex forms to add a profile with different type of experiences and all, achievements, educations and all, for that type of scenario, better to go for reactive form, and it is providing much more capability to create dynamic forms and to delete a specific field or a form from the DOM or to add dynamically. How do you authenticate Angular? So we have to create a authentication guard using ng schematics, ng generate guard and the guard name. So this authentication guard should be injected in the routing module, where we provide the routes, and with the property can activated route, so that every time when the user navigate to that particular route, this authentication guard is going to be invoked, and it will check whether the user is already logged in or not by looking at the authentication token and allow the user to navigate to the next page or not. So what are the Angular 17 features? So the first feature is a fresh looking documentation. So Angular provided Angular 17 documentation in the new website called angular.dev, and the look of the documentation is completely different from the previous versions of the Angular. This is the first feature that they added. Along with this documentation, they provided a playground where it's like along with this, they provided a playground where we can go and practice the Angular without using any IDE. The second feature is built-in control flow. So previously the way we were using ng if, ng switch and ng for features in Angular, that is changed, and currently we are using like a declarative format of HTML code. Within the HTML code, we can directly use @if and @for and @switch options in Angular. So the next feature is deferrable views. So the lazy loading feature, previously to lazy load a specific component, we have to make an entry in the routing file app.routing.ts file, and using load children, when the user navigate to that particular route, we used to load the children. But with the deferrable views, we can implement this lazy loading very easily by using @defer. There are different type of @defer options on a viewport, which is when the user scroll down to that specific element, that's when it will be loaded onto the DOM, browser DOM. And other one is on idle, when the page is completely loaded and the page is idle, that's when it will be called. And the other option is on immediate, so it will start lazy loading automatically without even blocking the browser. Other one is on timer, it will load the components or child components, lazy load the components depending upon the time that we provided on an interval. And next one is on interaction, so this is called when the user interact with that specific button or the page, piece of the page. On hover, this is called when the user hover on that specific HTML element. So they added some additional feature used for server side rendering. So this server side rendering, it will provide the feasibility for a single application to be used by two different clients, and when they load, each client data will be separated and the view is going to be separated accordingly. By using server side rendering, it will load the component that is already rendered on the server side, and it will be directly loaded onto the page on demand. They even added couple of lifecycle hooks which is after render, and it is to register a callback to be invoked each time the application finishes rendering. And the next one is after next render, it's a register to callback to be invoked the next time the application finishes rendering. So after first render, it will be called after render, and next time it will be called after next render. So the next feature is debugging tools. So for the Chrome browser, we can directly use the Chrome extension, and we can see the complete flow of the components that are rendered onto the UI and its relationships and the dependencies and everything in a visualized format. And it is much easy to understand large applications without looking at the code.